Michael Malice here. We got a special bit before we start the show today with Andy Schoonover, who's the CEO of Crowd Health. I've never done this before, but since Andy's product is something that I thought is of interest to a lot of you and bears explaining at length, I was happy to bring him on to discuss this. Now, what Crowd Health does is provides market-based alternatives to the corporate government healthcare system. Andy, can you explain why you had this idea and how it works as an alternative to traditional healthcare?
Yeah, sure. So I had sold my company and it was rolling off of that. And so like many Americans was not getting my health insurance through my employer. And so I went to healthcare.gov, which I thought was my only alternative. My wife and my two girls got on as $1,200 a month. And it worked great until I actually had to use it. So my little one was having recurring ear infections. So we go to the ear, nose, and throat doctor who said she needs tubes in her ears. Go to the local hospital, get tubes in her ears, got the bill for $8,000 for 15-minute procedure. And the health insurance plan said they weren't going to cover it because it was medically unnecessary. Even though we have an ear, nose, and throat doctor looking into her ears, she had a perforated eardrum and said it was medically unnecessary. And so I was like, man, I quit. I'm not going to pay $1,200 a month if you guys aren't going to pay for something when we need it. Our ear, nose, and throat doc delayed his vacation for a day to do this procedure because he was so worried about it. And somebody in New York, 1,000 miles away from where you and I live, make a determination it was medically unnecessary. So I thought, something's got to change here. Something's got to change. Our healthcare costs are going way too high, way too fast. We gotta have an alternative.
So how does Crowd Health work as an alternative?
Yeah, so we ask you to contribute a monthly amount. So if you're between the ages of 5 and 54, it's $175 a month into an account. You own the account. You pay for everything up to $500. And if it's over $500, you can use that account to pay for your bills. Okay. And so let's just say it's a really big one. Then we'll ask other people in the community to help you with those funds. So you'll just use the funds out of that account to both pay for your healthcare bills and to help out others when they have big healthcare bills. And that eliminates that health insurance middleman. And as a result, we're going to be able to you're going to pay 50% of what you'd pay with a healthcare.gov plan on average under our plan.
Why would the doctors or the hospitals be interested in taking a lower rate? Is that what ends up happening for them?
Yeah, they take 30 or 40%. We ask people to go in and say, hey, I'll pay cash. And the doctors hate health insurance companies so much, they'll take 30 or 40% less in cash than having to build a health insurance plan. That's how much interference the health insurance plan adds to the system. And so that's a big chunk of the savings is, all these docs are looking for a cash pay way of getting paid for their services.
Would I be able to have whatever doctor I wanted? How does that work?
Whatever doctor you want. So you can get the network mentality out. This is go to whatever doctor you want, whenever you want, wherever you want. And you just go in and say, hey, I'll pay cash. If it's under $500, you're paying for it. If it's over $500, we'll have the community help you pay for it.
How is this actuarially viable?
Yeah. And so the great part about this is that given that we're getting such much lower rates, real situation here, $500,000 cardiac arrest hospital bill, we negotiated it with the hospital. We got down to $100,000 and they've then said, you can pay it out over the next 2 years. So it was $4,000 or $5,000 a month for 2 years, as opposed to $500,000 in 1 month. And so just using modern finance techniques, we're able to allow the community to absorb catastrophic, huge bills way easier than, a health insurance plan would have to. I mean, think about your house. Very few of us can go out and buy a $500,000 house in cash. We need it spread over a period of time. We're using that same finance principle. But the great thing about the hospitals is they give us 0% interest. So you're paying 0% interest over a couple of years as opposed to a huge bill in the 1 month. And that's the way that we can financially do this viably.
Is this available to everyone?
Everybody except those who are smokers and those who are over 300 pounds if you're a male, over 260 pounds if you're a female. Otherwise, we'd love to have you join.
That eliminates the large bulk of my audience who are who are basically unemployable and just eating Oreos until they give themselves diabetes. This also, what I really like about this is this harkens back to the voluntary aid societies that Americans and people in other countries had before the rise of the welfare state. Now, one of the things I know you're very concerned about is the idea that healthcare.gov is the only mechanism by which people are going to acquire healthcare. From your perspective, why is that such a bad thing?
Yeah, we've been doing this the way that we've been doing it 2,000 years or more than that, thousands of years, where just if you have a problem, your community comes in and helps you, and the government has slowly taken that over. So now the government is the primary distributor of healthcare. They've already done it with Medicare, Medicaid, the CARES Act, of last year, basically subsidizes healthcare.gov and just increases the side of Medicaid. So ultimately, if you go to healthcare.gov, you are voting an affirmative for a government takeover of healthcare. I mean, that's ultimately what healthcare.gov is going to do is take over healthcare. And they may subsidize it through private companies, but those are our tax dollars being used to pay for that health insurance. So ultimately, that's the way that the government is going to take over our healthcare. And it's been shown not only in this country, but throughout countries all over the world, it is an ineffective way of distributing healthcare, is doing it through the government. It is massively inefficient.
Well, not only is it inefficient, it's also malevolent, because very easily the government healthcare system can decide, well, you don't matter right now, we're worrying about this or that other illness. For example, I have a friend, Lauren Chen, she's from Canada, and because of COVID, they decided her father can't have access to kind of cancer screenings after he had been diagnosed with cancer. So when you have a government monopoly on any kind of industry, you have politicians making decisions about people's lives. This literally means life and death for many other people.
We're seeing this in New York, where the governor just came out and said, you can't have X, Y, and Z medical procedures because of COVID. I mean, clearly we see an overreach by the government in the healthcare space over and over and over again. This is taking government out of the equation. It is a market-based system, and that's why we're able to be way more efficient in doing it.
Can you tell us how people can find out more about Crowd Health?
Yeah, go to joincrowdhealth.com. For all of your listeners, we have a code, welcome is the code you can put in there. It's $99 a month for 6 months to give you an opportunity to try out, see if you like it. We know that if you give us a chance, you're going to love, a true alternative to health insurance, which is, I think most of your listeners will agree, is a total pain in the ass.
I mean, that's putting it mildly. I mean, but we have to watch our language a little bit here. And I think most importantly, how's your daughter doing now?
She's doing great. After us having to stroke an $8,000 bill to the local hospital, fortunately, she's doing great. That's a great thing about our system. You'll be responsible for $500. The community will take care of the $7,500 in that case, right? So I wouldn't have to stroke an $8,000 check in that situation. So that's the greatness of the system that we've been able to build.
All right. Thank you so much, Andy. The website is joincrowdhealth.com. The promo code is welcome. And for $99 a month, you'll be able to have some more control over your healthcare options, and you don't have to be uninsured. And you don't have to worry about, if you are insured, that they're just going to tell you, screw you, you're going to have to pay for this bill out of your own pocket, in which case, why am I paying for this monthly premium every month to no end? So I think this is a great alternative, and I'm happy to promote this product.
Thanks, Michael.
Take care, Andy.
Hey guys, this week's episode is sponsored by Crowd Health. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and enter promo code WELCOME to get your first 6 months for just $99 a month. And now, here's the show. Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us probably our show's favorite guest, certainly one of my absolute favorite people, comic Dave Smith. He is co-host of Legion of Skanks, host of Part of the Problem, and his comedy special Libertas hit #1 on Amazon. It's available free now on iTunes and Odyssey, I believe.
And
YouTube. And it's not free on iTunes. Sorry, it's free on YouTube. And by the way, I would like to announce to you all, I have officially joined Odyssey. Now that I'm they figured out how to get this boomer to get his stuff over there. So it's just Michael Malice is the username. So please join me over there. Dave, we had a little bit of window where we stopped the crossovers. You had a little family issue. I'm very glad to report, as you have reported as well, that all's well with your boy. And as a result of this, Dave has, of course, had no sleep. And as I was telling him before we started recording, he looks like a Jawa who pulled the hood back and or someone who's perpetually afraid. I've never seen your hair this long.
I am afraid, Michael. I'm afraid for the future of this nation. And that's what you're seeing with my hair. It's the same length. It's always been. It's just
I'm home alone.
It's the vaccine passports. That's what's done it to me. No, as it turns out, I figured this out after all the drama and health issues were all settled down and everything's back to normal. But then you're just like, oh, having 2 kids is still really tough to get anything done. It's a lot harder than one. Like with one kid, you can like get a break every now and then and be like, okay, I'm going to go get a haircut. But with 2 kids, you're like, okay, take the one kid and then I'll go, oh no, I have the other kid. And so, I've been trying to schedule time when I could go get one, but that's the end of this whole story is I need a haircut.
It's like Indiana Jones, because you got one kid here. It's like, well, if I get rid of this one, it's like, well, you got the other one.
I have to like switch one and put it on the thing. Okay. All right. Oh shoot. Now I got the other one. But it's great.
Something I wanted to discuss with you, I know you're in Jersey right now, but obviously you're working out of New York. Just this morning, Mayor de Blasio has announced, neither of us or anyone listening to this had any doubts that on his way out, this guy's going to do as much carnage as possible. Frankly, I don't blame him. If I'm on my way out of a political position, I'm going to do what I can because I'm not going to have repercussions for it. But he announced that he's going to be mandating vaccinations for private businesses. It's going to start, the rules are going to start on the 15th, and it's going to be implemented on the 27th. Is the sense in New York, because here in Austin, in the nation of Texas, it's not really a thing like COVID. We're all completely over it. When you see someone wearing a mask, that this is like an awful and affluent white female liberal. Like I was at a restaurant last night, there was one woman in a mask, it's kind of situation. What is the vibe on the floor back in that failed state?
Yeah, well, by the way, it's so interesting because I've traveled a decent amount throughout the last 21 months or whatever it's been. It's really such a fascinating thing to see. Like being in Austin and being in South Dakota, you go there and it's like it's 2019 basically, with like maybe slight differences, with the slight difference that you see occasionally someone wearing a mask. But aside from that, it's like you're living in the before times. Everything's normal. And then you go to New York City and it's quite a bit different. Well, I was in New York City a lot since we've stopped doing the regular crossover episodes. When we're getting ready to have the baby, he was born at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, and I was there with him. He was in the NICU for a while, so I was in New York City, had the whole family living there for quite a while. And even before this new stuff today, it is so sad that it's taken several steps backward. It's like New York was kind of getting better and then completely reverted back to a point where outdoor masking is completely normalized, and young people, 16, 17-year-old kids in masks at the playground. I'm talking, there are 2 and 3-year-olds in masks. Not all of them, but I'd say 30-40% maybe of the kids there have masks. And the ones who do look at you when your kid doesn't have a mask with kind of like a look like, you're making us look bad. Luis Perez, who's an amazing comedian who obviously you're buddies with as well, he had this tweet, and like it's the kind of thing where sometimes someone will say something and you're like, how is no one said? The tweet just said, if you don't have COVID, you can't spread COVID. These kids don't have it. They can't get it and they can't spread it. Yeah, that's what's so crazy. It's just like it's a mass hysteria, which is a very weird thing to be right in the middle of. It's the type of thing you're more comfortable reading about in a book about a previous time. And, how were people so silly then? But you realize, we're all the same biological entity that those people were, and we're living through one now. So this thing today with de Blasio, and of course, what's her name? Cuomo's replacement there declared Kathy Hochul, she declared a state of emergency last week. And so that kind of, I think, opened the door for de Blasio to freak out on his way out. But right, he announced two things that were really major. Number one was that all private businesses have to have a vaccine mandate if they're operating in New York City. The other thing, which surprisingly to me is getting less press coverage, but I found even more appalling, was that 5-year-olds and up are now subject to the vaccine passport. So
What?
if your 5-year-old has
No, are
not
you
gotten
serious?
vaccinated, he now cannot enter into a restaurant. Just like they have now made a class of 5, 6, 7-year-old kids second-class citizens, if you will. I mean, in some ways, kids are already second-class
Wait,
citizens.
I got to interrupt you because that also means because there's something else he said, which is he's going to. Well, I don't know if he's going to have the power because he's out of here in 3 weeks or 3.5 weeks. That you have to be fully vaccinated. So he's saying it's going to have the boosters as well. So you would need these 6-year-olds to get shots every 6 months in perpetuity.
Well, I'm not
Wait,
sure.
on the other hand, you know what? Is it so bad if the kids aren't at the fucking restaurant?
Well, there is something to that. But it seems like nothing more than a punishment to the people who were not willing to comply with the COVID regime. I mean, that's like, there's no way you could stretch this to have anything to do with mitigating the virus. No one seriously believes this anymore. And no one who's thinking about the virus actually believes that, like, keeping people out of restaurants who are unvaccinated is going to somehow make a difference, let alone children who are unvaccinated out of restaurants, who we know are very poor conductors for viral transmission of COVID. This is all silly. Also, the other thing that's just crazy is that nobody knows what level of protection the vaccines are going to give you against this new variant, but the assumption is very little. That's, if you look at the Omicron, it's or Omicron, whatever, however you say it, it's mutated substantially more than Delta has. So the most educated guess from most epidemiologists is that the vaccine will give you less protection against that than it does against Delta. And we already know the protection against Delta was pretty weak, much weaker than what was initially, claimed about the vaccine protections. Like, it went from something like 94% to like 52%. With Delta. This is going to be way lower than that. And so this has nothing to do with protecting people from the virus. It's awful.
Do you know what I'm really, really scared of? Like, I'm scared that they're going to declare war on COVID, because once they say we're declaring war on COVID, we're really screwed. That means everyone's going to die. If you look at the war on drugs, if you look at the war on poverty, how many more poor people there are, how many more people are drug addicts and drug users and thrown in jail. So if they're saying war on COVID, like, I'm black pilled as hell. It's over, man. Like,
and of course, we're
all going to be dead in our FEMA camps.
Yeah, and of course the other big one's the war on terror, right? And it basically means that they'll never end and we will never win. That's right. What the government declaring war on concepts means. So yeah, it is. I mean, I really do think like it's I don't know how exactly it would happen, but de Blasio and many of the other mayors and governors, it really should be like forcibly arrested and removed from his position and stand some sort of trial. And I know that people will argue like whether, like, I don't even care if there's a constitutional justification for this. Much like you, I don't care about the Constitution, and I don't like, it's the best document in America's founding is the Declaration of Independence. And one of the things that's great about the Declaration of Independence, which I bet you would agree with this, is that it is a quasi-anarchist document, at least in spirit. It basically says we're not appealing to anything other than this greater purpose that we just declare exists. Like, which is amazing too, that they're just like, well, we find it self-evident. So there you go.
Well, that's
it's self-evident.
Like,
so what are you going to say about that?
When conservatives talk about the Constitution, they don't really like the Constitution per se. They like the principles the Constitution embodied. So if the Constitution, mandated like affirmative action or abortion or things like that, they would hate the Constitution. So implicitly, they realize it's not what's in that Constitution. It's the philosophy behind it that you're a fan of, which has been discarded the second that the Constitution was even argued for in Philadelphia.
Exactly. But whereas the Declaration of Independence, which is actually a declaration of war, which is also pretty badass, is that it's basically just saying, look, we are just telling you that we have rights. And if you and people have a right to say, no, fuck you, you're not my government. I'm going to form my own government. and I don't have to follow your government. And that, if you really follow the implications from that and extrapolate them all the way out, will get you to anarchy. But that, to me, that like there should be some higher power by which you can just say, no, Bill de Blasio has no right to do this to people. And as you pointed out, he is doing it on his way out. This is a vengeful move, but it's really gonna, I mean, we'll see what happens. I still hold on to somewhat of a thought where I'm like, I don't think this is sustainable. I just don't. And I think this is ultimately gonna fail.
By the way, as an aside, as we speak, my house is still a disaster in terms of unpacking. And at my feet to my left is a declaration signed by Robespierre. I just got a Robespierre autograph. So that ties in perfectly. But that just shows what a mess my house is. One of the things I want to talk to you about, as you know, you and I are both anarchists, is a lot of times there's criticisms of anarchism, which I think are very valid or bear discussing. What do you think is, let me just ask you that. What do you think is the strongest critique of anarchism from you? I'll tell you mine while you think about it if you want.
Okay, yeah, you tell me yours.
My argument, the one they have, is what's going to happen with the kids. Like, how does anarchism resolve child predation? And I think it's easy to wave that away. My answer, which is a weak one, I will admit, is there's no system where this isn't a problem. Our current system is a nightmare when it comes to child abuse. It stems from, if you want to be really rationalistic, the fact that biologically, what happens is when you have a child, they are subject to the whims of one or two powerful people who have larger, like, strong control over them. And there's enough cases where that's a real problem.
Yeah, well, I think so to me, that the issue there, and I do understand where it's somewhat unsatisfactory, but whenever you think about these things, you know, you can't, the flaw is the binary thinking and thinking, well, what has the perfect solution versus what doesn't have the perfect solution. And no system, you have to compare systems and say, where are the higher likelihoods of abuse of children to happen? And look, as you famously point out almost more than anyone, look where the most child abuse happens in public schools, and the government does absolutely nothing. I shouldn't say absolutely nothing. In really horrific cases of abuse, the government does remove kids from their family, and it is justified in those cases, I believe.
Sure.
But far more often than that, they rip people out of semi-abusive situations and send them into equally or more abusive systems to go grow up in foster homes and stuff like that. So I think the problem, or one of the many problems with government, is that people are either moral enough to elect moral enough people to then impose moral enough rules, or they're not. And if they're not, then the system of government doesn't work. And also, if they're not, these other systems are going to have problems. So I think in general that allowing, an armed society and a moral society is going to be your best bet to protect all people. It's not a perfect answer, but it's, I think, better than what we have. But I do agree with you that should be, I mean, I think it's just appalling that the low regard that children are treated in our current society. I think it's unbelievable that Stefan Molyneux, I think was the greatest thing he ever did was really harp on this peaceful parenting stuff forever, and that it's just so accepted that people will just argue openly that we have the right to hit kids. There's no other class of people that people make this argument for, but for children, it's just like, yeah, I don't know, I don't hit them that hard. Still, like, it's with an open hand and it's on their butt. So why is that like such a problem? Like, this is still accepted. I think the fact that, they're, hold on, shoot, sorry.
Well, it's not just accepted. It's that it's regarded as there's really no alternative. Now, I could make that argument that spanking is, like, I can wrap my head around that. I'm not a dad. I have two nephews, and I was spanked, and I can see how when the child's a certain age, like smacking his hand, I mean, if he's reaching for a fire or something like that, I can wrap my head around that. In terms of I can actually have the engagement, but like for a lot of people, it's just a complete non-starter to say that this is something we should at least aspire toward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I think if you can smack their hand, then you can pull their hand away if you're that close to them reaching for a fire. And there's,
I think a lot of times it's going to be a reflex action, right? If you see a kid going for the knife, you're just, who knows? I don't know. I'm not a parent.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't really, I cannot see any scenario where I would hit either of my kids in any capacity. And I don't, it's pretty simple that like, if they're,
yeah, you can. Well, hold on. What if they do this? I mean, let's pretend it's not your kids because I don't want to make it personal.
Oh, other people's
like,
kids? I'll hit them all day long. Yeah,
no,
problem.
but I mean, like, kids do really, like, if they shove somebody down the stairs or something like that, like another kid, like kids do really awful things all the time, especially at a young age.
Sure. But so what would the benefit of me hitting a kid for doing that be?
Well, because if again, I'm just thinking this through. I'm just trying to think of an example. If this is a scenario where that kid has never been hit and now they all of a sudden for the first time in their life have been hit, like they're going to realize, oh, this is something I've really, really crossed the line.
Yeah, right. I mean, I just think if a kid can realize, like if they're old enough to reason with them, that you can hit them into realizing that they crossed the line, then there's another way to make them realize that they've crossed the line, short of hitting them. And if they're not old enough to reason, then they're just getting hit. And whatever you may, you know, if your lesson to the kid that you're trying to impart is that it is unacceptable to hit someone else, it is unacceptable to use violence and hurt someone else, I don't think you being a much bigger, stronger person hitting them exactly imparts that message.
I think the message would be I think the message is if you are going to be violent towards someone, worse violence is going to be inflicted on you.
Yeah, I don't know if that's exactly the message I'd want my kids to have. You're teaching them that might makes right.
When it comes to healthcare, it's important you're getting your money's worth. So what Crowd Health does, it offers a more flexible and affordable healthcare option without the hassle of insurance. So while you're shopping around, don't forget to go to joincrowdhealth.com to find out how Crowd Health can help you save 40 to 60 in healthcare costs each year. It's not health insurance. It's a modern way to pay medical expenses because Crowd Health is a community of people who are tired of paying into a broken system. Being in the Crowd Health community can save hundreds of dollars monthly and put thousands of dollars back in your pocket. Here are the benefits. It's flexible. Monthly subscription, start or stop when it's convenient for you. It's simple. Use their app, find nearly any doctor in the country with a quality ranking score. You scan the bills, throw them away. Crowd Health takes it from there. Membership. They get rid of the insurance middleman and they pass the savings on to the members. 100% of your monthly membership pays for actual healthcare costs. This helps the whole Crowd Health community stay healthy while keeping more money in your pocket. How do they do this? They're offering these amazing prices because the community is made up of health conscious members. And they've got an amazing offer just for you guys. You get your first 6 months for just $99 a month. That's a saving almost half of their standard savings, a lot less than those crappy high deductible plans. Just go to joincrowdhealth.com/99 and use code WELCOME at sign up. That's joincrowdhealth.com/99 and promo code WELCOME. Remember, Crowd Health is not health insurance. It's a community powered alternative to health insurance and terms and conditions may apply. Hey guys, you ever feel like you're being followed around the internet and maybe advertisers know a bit too much about you? So our sponsor, Ipvanishvpn, helps you take back your privacy and become anonymous on the internet. So what is it? Ipvanish is a virtual private network. That's a VPN for short. It's an important tool that helps you safely browse the internet. You can use it on your computer, your tablet, phone, Fire Stick when you stream media. All your data is encrypted. What you're reading, what you're searching, what you're watching. It's important because what you're doing on the internet is no one's business but yours. And for listeners of the show, Ipvanish is offering 65% off their annual plan, only $375 a month. Super easy to use. Turn on with one click. It runs in the background, protects you while you're browsing the web. If you do run into a problem, don't worry about it. They've got 24/7 support available by email, chat, and telephone. All you have to do is go to ipvanish.com/malice. Use promo code malice. That's MALICE, 65% off. Their annual plan is just $44.99 for the first year with our exclusive discount. Now's the time to sign up. And Ipvanish is the best. They've got a 4.7 out of 5 rating on Trustpilot with over 6,000 reviews. Remember, it's ipvanish.com/malice to get the deal and start protecting yourself online. Let's get back to the show. But I mean, in a sense, there's a certain type of young person where they will only, again, not talking about your kids, where they have gotten away with violence. If you sit them down and you lecture them, they smile and nod and then they go do whatever they want. At a certain point, these kids have to be like, all right, you're going to have consequences for this.
If you look at violent children, and I think there's a lot of empirical data that would back me up on this, the vast majority of the time. The problem is not that they haven't seen violence or had violence inflicted on them.
That's true too.
Usually,
That's a good point.
Usually kids are they're pretty mimemic, and they're usually imitating what they've seen.
So is that why your kids are never funny?
Neither of them are. Neither of them. Very dry, very into economics, but they don't crack jokes.
So let's hear your critique. What you think is the most effective critique of anarchism?
I mean, look, I suppose there's lots of critiques of anarchism that aren't exactly critiques of anarchism, that are just critiques of people. So this problem still exists whether you have a state or you don't, right? But I suppose if the problem one could argue with anarchy is if you have more powerful, I suppose a foreign policy argument, that if you have more powerful neighboring states, how you deal with them. And the example of Somalia does come to mind, where they were essentially in anarchy for years. And this had a lot of the positive effects that we would expect it to have. The standard of living was rising very quickly. The economy was growing. I believe the standard of living was the fastest rising in sub-Saharan Africa. And this was basically because the warlords had, after the communists fell, the warlords basically tried to fight and take over, and just no one had enough juice to actually run the government. And so they just kind of had a stalemate without a government.
So you agree that juice runs the government?
The juice has always been behind the big banks and the politicians. But then George W. Bush, after 9/11, sent in JSOC and the CIA and the special forces, and they basically destroyed the whole place, started propping up one side of the warlord factions versus the other. So even if we think about in our models where you have these defense resolution agencies and things like that, if you have the Soviet Union or the United States of America coming in and supplying one of them with a whole bunch of weapons and arms in order to take over, that can make things difficult. And that's something we'd have to think about how to guard against.
Let's talk about what we each regard as the dumbest arguments against anarchism. And there's one I get where to me, it is so stupid that it's hard for me to kind of empathize with that position without assuming the person is stupid as well, as opposed to mistaken. Like a criticism, which I think is mistaken, which I think can be respectable, is the belief people have that markets tend toward monopoly. So therefore, if you're going to have a competition in terms of security, you're going to end up with the government eventually. I don't think markets tend toward monopoly. I think that's a kind of progressive economic approach. History doesn't bear it out, but I can wrap my head around that and have that conversation. For me, the dumbest one is under anarchism, you, Michael, would be the first one to be destroyed. And it's so and I don't realize it. Like, first of all, I realize I'm small. Okay. Second of all, I think it's the idea that if the government police monopoly vanished, that everyone is immediately defenseless, that there wouldn't be lots of dudes who have trained in MMA and guns who are eager to make quick money by doing nothing other than just being big and standing there like a bouncer. The claim that, like, okay, if I can't provide for my own security because somehow I can't acquire weaponry, or I can't stay at the house of someone who has like a mansion, or I wouldn't have people have my back. And how am I getting medicine? How am I getting food? How am I getting education? All of these things are services I would outsource. But for this one, and also the point I always make is, even if that's true, that doesn't disprove anarchism. It just means anarchism will be bad for me. That's still like, I can't say, well, if this system works for me, like if I'm a George Soros or a Mitt Romney, we should have this system. Look how successful I am. That's not like logical in a moral sense.
Well, I think that so that's one that I've gotten before too. And yeah, I find that one, it's hilarious in how absurd it is, that it's like, okay, so wait, you're telling me, like, right now I am the person that I am already. Like, whatever size you are, whatever fighting ability you have, you're already existing as that person in the world with lots of other people around you all day long. And even with the police, crime still happens. It's not like you're not still vulnerable to those same things. So you're saying, okay, we're going to take you, like, we're going to give you, we're going to instantly make you 50% richer because we're not stealing half your money right away. And we're also going to abolish all laws that prohibit you from having any form of defense that you want.
Right.
aren't you in trouble now? And you're like, well, I mean, I'm still me. And now with all these added benefits, seems like I'm substantially safer and wealthier and more able to protect myself.
And I can build a moat.
Yeah, like there's no more like restrictions
but
on
also
how you can protect
this
yourself.
idea that like in neighborhoods, people like especially males, right, would be perfectly fine with like all the houses next door to you being burglarized and the people murdered. Well, as long as it's not my house. It's like, no, you would very quickly have, if not lynch mobs, neighborhood watch or some system, because people, there's the neighborhood watch is like, if we're all looking around, it's going to keep us all safe. And that's not a government at all.
No, of course not. And there's no reason why, and I'm supposed to be debating a right-winger, that Scott Greer guy on the police coming up. But we haven't set a date yet, but we've both agreed to do it. But of course, like, the idea that a monopoly of government workers doing your security, the idea that anyone who's not like a progressive just immediately buys into that must be a superior way to do it.
No, and the only way to do it. Without
that, like, wouldn't we all grant that, okay, in every other field, we would acknowledge that privately this would be done much more efficiently and effectively, right?
Or even if less, it's like it still would exist to some point.
Yes,
but in their perspective, it ceases to exist. Like if public schools, if there was like Thanos and all public schools vanished, right? And you can make an argument that would be a terrible thing. No one would say that means no one's capable of educating themselves or other people at that point.
Right. Of course not. And then, and you, most right wingers would mock this idea if any left winger proposed it to them, that if you want to, if you want to abolish public schools, or even if you just want to abolish certain aspects of public school, like even if you just say, we don't want critical race theory taught in school, and they say, so then no one will know that slavery happened. And you're like, nah, I think we could still tell people, like, I think I'm still capable of like talking about something without this. So it's the same principle.
And I also love the idea that the whole point of school is to make sure people know slavery happened. Like that is really their big priority. It's not like how to like balance a checkbook, how to read, how to do math. It's like, this is the thing we really need to make sure everyone knows.
And as if we have a deficency of that in our society. Like the real problem is so many people just have no idea that once blacks were enslaved in America. Right. Have you heard of this? It was real.
It was really bad.
And we're against it. Not only did it happen, but it's bad. So yeah, that one is particularly ridiculous. But I guess the one that I find the most interesting and absurd and the weakest is kind of the one that you brought up before, that you said was you can kind of understand, but it's not even one particular criticism of anarchy. It's this type of criticism of anarchy where the criticism applies so much more to the existence of a state than to the absence of a state. And you see this all the time. Like once you just start thinking about anarchy, you see this all the time. And I don't mean to pick on him, but when you debated on Lex Friedman's show, when you and Yaron Brook debated, and he said, I forget the exact line he said to you, but he said something like, anarchy is oh my god damn it, I'm gonna blank on the line, but it was just a perfect description of government. Like he said to you that anarchy is a minority like imposing their will on a majority or something like that, and you were like, dude, like just step back and think about this. And there's lots of different individual arguments against anarchy that all fall into this class. So whatever it will be, like you said before, the markets lead to monopoly. And you're like, okay, but you're advocating a monopoly in the truest sense of the word monopoly. There's never going to be a monopoly that's as true of a monopoly as the government is, which is from any type of government you have cannot not be a monopoly. And if it's not, then it's not a government anymore. The government says we have a monopoly on at least legislation, courts, like at the very least, they have to have a monopoly on these services. And then in most, senses, also police and schools and all types of other things. But so there's just always these arguments that are far more applicable to government than anarchy, but are launched with like this certitude that we've got anarchy pegged right here, because look, I mean, how do you deal with this? What if one of these criminal defense, or one of these defense resolution, agencies were to take over, and now they run the whole thing? So what about that, mister? And you're like, so your answer is to start with that? Like, that's your response? It's like, well, your worst case scenario would be really bad, so I want to enshrine your worst case scenario into law.
Hey guys, we got a different kind of sponsor for this episode. It's the Jordan Harbinger Show. It's a podcast you really should be listening to. Every day someone tells you, you have to listen to this podcast. You have to listen to Your Welcome. You have to listen to Part of the Problem. Those people don't know what they're talking about. Jordan Show, which Apple named one of the best of 2018, is aimed at making you a better informed, more critical thinker so you get a sense of how the world actually works. Each episode is a conversation with a guest, and there's something for everyone. One episode, he's talking to a hostage negotiator from the FBI. Another episode, he's talking to a cinematographer who discovered a lost city in the jungle and made a major archaeological find. We really enjoy this show here at Podcast One, and think you will as well. Search for the Jordan Harbinger Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And here are some URLs to get more info. If you go to jordanharbinger.com/subscribe, you can download it there. Apple Podcasts at jordanharbinger.com/iTunes. And to learn more about Jordan as a host, jordanharbinger.com/about. Hey guys, Michael Malice here. Author, Twitter troll, podcaster, and of course, underwear model. And the underwear I model and the underwear I wear is Sheath Underwear. What's great about Sheath is their dual pouch technology for both parts of your male anatomy. First time you try it on, what is this guy Malice talking about? I never know what I'm talking about, but I do know what I'm talking about here, because it's the most comfortable underwear you are ever going to wear, and I wear it every day. They've got new lines out now. They got the bamboo. They've got mesh to give you even more comfort in the hot summer days, or when you're working out, or in the winter days. It's 80 degrees down in Austin. I'm very, very happy about that. Have fun up north, you losers. If you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice, you get 20% off and you get inside my pants. That's sheathunderwear.com, promo code Malice for 20% off. Support the underwear that supports this show and so many others, and that supports you. I love Sheath, and you won't find me without it, even when I'm showering. Let's get back to the show. Dave, I will never, this is, you know how when you're young, you make these certain realizations, and then you get older, you're like, yeah, no, you were right. Because when you're young, you're like, am I missing something? Like if a grown up is saying this, because I remember as a kid, I was clever enough that if there were things on television, like on a sitcom, that the characters who were like adults didn't know, then I knew in school I didn't need to know this. Because if they're just like laughing about, wait, what's the cap of North Dakota? I'm like, if they don't know this, I don't really need to know this. Like, they're teaching me this for no reason. So that was very effective. But I remember very vividly, I was in college, and this must have been must have been early, because this was like in 94. And Clinton was pushing forth his healthcare plan. He was going to have socialized healthcare. And the teacher was arguing that healthcare is bad right now, because like rich people have access to quality care, and poor people often don't have access to any care at all, which is not true because of Medicare and Medicaid, but whatever. And she's like, this leads to shortages, and so we need to have rationing. And I go, wait a minute. So I couldn't believe that this was it was so clearly like just the Indiana Jones bait and switch. It's Kathy Newman. It was Kathy Newman. I was actually correct. So it's like bizarro Kathy Newman. I go, so what you're saying is the current system of ration is bad because it leads to rationing. So we have to put this system into place, which mandates rationing or causes rationing by law. And she said yes. And I'm like, okay. Like, I didn't get it at the time. And now years later, I do get it. She just wanted to get to where she wanted to get. Jonathan Haidt figured this out. People start with their conclusion, and then they reason their way to it. And if the reasoning doesn't make sense, it doesn't matter. Mentally, they feel comfortable that they've gotten to the goal that they reached. But this informs a lot of my political analysis or commentary, whatever you want to call it. It's that I think people would be a lot happier having these debates. The arguments that they have don't matter. What matters is they have their vision and what they want it to look like. And as long as it's something rational, someone on the TV gives them a way to get there, they're there.
But there's something about it that's interesting. And I have an experience that I think is kind of similar to that when I was a little kid with a teacher. And I think the way your mind works, and I think my mind works the same way, just not quite as well. But the way that whatever that personality trait or characteristic is that you're like, no, this is self-contradictory. And that bugs me. And not everybody has that. Not everybody is, and this is what we see all the time, and this is a real problem that my beloved autists in the libertarian world have often, is that it's like you're fighting with a different force than they are. And you think you're like, I just made a great logical argument to this progressive, haha, got it. And they're blown away that it doesn't faze them at all, because that just doesn't bother. Like the type of thing that would keep me or you up at night if someone pointed out a major inconsistency in our worldview, just does not bother other people. But anyway, my story like this.
I'm just going to say one sentence, because a lot of times, like if someone will come at me on Twitter and they'll call me a Nazi, and someone will jump in and be like, oh, he's Jewish. 0% of the time does it faze them.
Yes.
It will never faze them. All you're doing is giving them useful biographical information about me to attack them further. They will never at all even pause for a moment.
Yes. And this is why what you do, even whether you consciously think about it like this or not, but what you're very good at doing is fighting the fight on their terms. Always. Which is that you go, now, if someone sits down for a conversation with you and is like, hey, Michael, I think you're logically wrong here, and let's have the argument. You're like very happy to like have a discussion about this. But when people come at you with that energy, the response is not to go, no, but he's actually Jewish and he actually believes in the absence of the state, and the Nazis believed in a centralized state. And you don't fight that force with logic. Right. With that force, you fight it with mockery. Yes. That's what it is. You have to let them know that there will be more stigma and shame attached to you coming at me like this than there will be some rewarding feeling for coming at me. Like that's the only way to deal with that, because they're not fighting in the fight of logic. It's literally like if you think you're playing basketball and someone else is boxing and they punch you in the face and you're like, well, I better take a jump shot. Like, no. Now's the time to drop the basketball and start fighting, because we're not playing basketball anymore. Okay.
And anyway, one more thing, and just another thing is, a lot of these people in any other context would willfully admit that to divorce Nazism from anti-Semitism is to engage in a low form of Holocaust denial. There were lots of groups targeted by the Nazis: the Jews, gays, gypsies, people who were disabled, so on and so forth. But this was very central to what Nazism was. So just like being black was central to the slave experience of the South. So in any other context, these people would be like, wait a minute, if you're just going to pretend that the Nazis were bad instead of they targeted a certain specific populations, you're really sweeping something historical under the rug. But when it comes to Twitter, they're like, oh, look at this Nazi.
Yeah, no, that's again, like you said, the contradiction, the hypocrisy doesn't faze them. So my story like this was, I was in the 6th grade, and my history teacher is actually a very sweet woman. But she was, obviously very left leaning. But I didn't know anything. I didn't know what communism was. I couldn't have told you anything about it. And capitalism, I probably just knew was like, you can buy stuff. Like the hell knows? I don't know. I'm in 6th grade. I don't care. But she was talking about communism because she was teaching us something about Karl Marx. And she said, I remember she said that communism is a system that works really good on paper, but doesn't work in the real world.
Right.
And this drove me nuts. And I raised my hand and had a back and forth with her, and she wouldn't budge on it. And I remember just being like, wait, no. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
If something works on paper, then it works in the real world, or it didn't work on paper.
Right.
That's the point of the paper.
Everything works on paper.
But then it doesn't work.
Right.
It's just on paper. It doesn't work on paper. It's just written on paper. And I remember having this argument with her back and forth.
This is the aspiest I've ever heard you. And that's saying a lot.
And this was in 6th grade. I already just had this thing where I was like, no, it doesn't. That's like saying like, oh, I have these blueprints, these perfect blueprints for a building, but every time you build it, it crumbles. And you're like, but then the blueprints aren't perfect. There's obviously something wrong with what's on paper. If it can't, because that's the only point of on paper, is to plan to put it in the real world. And I still it's still something that I think it bothers me when I see examples of this, but you're like, no, theory is only as correct as can be applied in the real world. And if it can't be applied in the real world, then it's bad theory. It's stupid. There's no point in any of this. And like, that's the point that, anyway, that drove me nuts. And I didn't understand why at the time, but I think I understand more now why it bothered me.
So let's talk about, I know this drives people crazy, but I think this is important. You have taken on a new Twitter strategy because you used to spend a lot of time engaging with the people that you call the loser brigades. These are these libertarians who are kind of very culturally left. And the way I describe it is that they prefer liberty, but they believe in the state. Very often, not for some of them, certainly the Washington DC types. What made you decide to be like, I'm not going to be having these Twitter beefs with these dorks anymore?
Well, it's just that basically we're coming up on winning.
What does that mean?
Libertarian Party.
Yeah. What does that mean? First of all, that's not possible. There is no winning in the Libertarian Party. It's only losing. It's less losing.
Okay, let me make clear. We're winning internally in the Libertarian Party. Externally, we're still don't you get crazy on me here. Don't worry, I'm not going to shake things up that much. I promise. But it's just kind of like, this has been to some degree a strategy of mine for a while now, that I was like, once I got in the Libertarian Party and I was like, hey, look, this is this Mises Caucus wave. We're here to kind of bring the liberty movement into the Libertarian Party and make it what it's supposed to be, and something closer to the Ron Paul type of movement than the Cato type of movement. Okay. And and at the time, there were these kind of deranged people who were like, this is a Nazi takeover and all of this. And so my thing was like, well, listen, any one of you guys who wants to debate about this, we can do this, and we can see who has the superior arguments and who convinces more people. And as I kind of suspected, it was just, it was like bloodbath after bloodbath, and our numbers grew and theirs.
Well, in all fairness, Hitler was pretty persuasive.
Yeah. No, that's my point. I'm saying I'm demonstrating, I'm living my reality.
Living my Nazi truth.
Yes, that's right. And who are you to deny me my lived experience? But so after a while, it's like they just, now that we're coming up on kind of being the dominant faction in the Libertarian Party, and a lot of those people are leaving the party, and more of our people are coming in, it's like, I don't want it to seem like, because it's really not the case, that what I came in here to do was just to constantly be picking fights and dunking on other libertarians, because that's not really, really the goal is to be cleaning this room up and then taking all of that energy and blasting it outward. I want to be dunking on Democrats and progressives and neocons and stuff like that. So it was just kind of like, after a certain amount of time, it was like, okay, I'm declaring victory and moving on from this portion of the battle, and now focusing more, not that I ever wasn't focusing my attention on that, but just like no more distractions with this stuff. And also it's there's a real tone that's changed. I don't know if you probably don't follow it quite as closely as I do, but there's a real tone that's changed within the Libertarian Party. Whereas so when I debated that guy Andy Craig, he said in the debate, and this is, I guess, a little over a year ago, I think, he said in the debate, he was like, look, this is why you guys are just going to continue to lose internal elections in the Libertarian Party, because you guys are such awful people, blah, blah, blah. And then we just went on to win.
Wait, can I say one more thing? That's what's funny to me. Like, a lot of times people come at me on Twitter, or because that's the only place I interact with other human beings. That's why I bring it up as an example. And they are genuinely of the belief that I'm completely a pariah and no one likes me. And I'm like, don't you think if someone has like 300,000 followers, maybe 0.1% of them like him? Let's pretend they're all hate follows, but this 0.1%. But they can't think in those terms, because they think if I don't like you, then no one likes you.
Yes, it's just another form of binary thinking. It's just like,
it's also a form of narcissism. Yes. Like Andy's like, I hate you, or not hate. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I find you repulsive and repellent. Everyone I know here at Cato finds your tactics repulsive and repellent. Good luck. You're screwed. Like, I just did I'm not just asking myself. I went down the hall and everyone agrees that you're just toxic and dumb.
Yeah, what was that quote? I can't remember her name, but it was the woman who said, literally no one I know voted for Nixon, in which she was actually being, I think,
Pauline Kael.
Yes, and I think she was actually in the quote being humble, and like I think if you go on in the quote,
Yeah,
I
discussed this, and then you're right. So the quote has been
that's right.
perverted to say, "I can't believe Nixon won. No one I know voted for her." What she actually said was worse. She goes, like, what? Because she's a movie critic, she's a film critic. She's like, "I know they're out there. Like, if I'm in the movie theater, I can feel him sitting like next to me, but like I don't know who these people are." So it wasn't that she was shocked that he won, but like it was just like she has no Venn diagram between her world and those other people, which is not untrue.
Yeah, but so anyway, it's like, but when you see the numbers, I would think you'd have to be somewhat humble. Like, it's, and that's what always kind of blew me away about these guys was that it's like, well, listen, just since we only interact on social media, and you see that everything you post just gets ratioed and everything I post gets, more, likes than anything you post, wouldn't you at least think, I guess there are some people who are agreeing with it. Now, maybe there's more people not off social media who agree with you, but what indication of that do you have? The only interaction we have is where there's this indication that not a lot of people are agreeing. But anyway, but that's not guys like that who are like, oh, you're going to lose all the internal elections. Now, the tone of all of it is like, well, if the Mises Caucus takes over after the convention, I'm leaving the party. And Andy Craig already left the party, and a lot of them other are leaving. So I just see this almost as like, oh yeah, they're all kind of in their own psychological way starting to acknowledge that, yeah, this is happening. And now we have to deal with what our explanation for why it happened was. It's like the same way the media goes from like Trump can never win to like he only won because of racism or Russia or whatever. It's like, okay, so spin whatever narrative you have to. I'm not that interested in being around for that part of it. You guys can find whatever justification you want, a rationalization for why this happened. But I also don't, there's a different role I think you have to play when you're the insurgency and then when you're the government, for lack of better term. So once we have kind of the party and it is the people we want in there, and like Angela McArdle, who's fantastic, she's going to be the next chair, and we kind of like have more of a tone where the Libertarian Party Twitter account seems more like things me or Michael Malice would tweet than things that Jonah Goldberg would tweet or something like that. Then I don't think the role is for me to be fighting internally amongst libertarians. I think the role is to be leading the charge against the true enemy.
Hey guys, Michael Malice here. Now, we all want to make sure our family's protected in medical emergency, and what many of us don't realize, health insurance won't always cover the full amount of an emergency medical flight. Even with comprehensive coverage, you get hit with high deductibles and copays. That is why an Air Medcare Network membership is so important. As a member, if an emergency arises, you won't see a bill for air medical transport when flown by an AMCN provider. And best of all, a membership covers your entire household for as little as $85 a year. AMCN providers are called upon to transport more than 100,000 patients a year. It's coverage no family should be without. As a listener of our show, you'll get up to a $50 e-gift card with new membership. All you have to do is go to airmedcarenetwork.com/malice and use offer code malice.
This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Pettisy.
I love hearing people's stories of resilience and grit. This is why I created this podcast.
We are very excited to welcome Jim Gaffigan, Yasmin Mohammed, Glenn Beck, Tim Dillon, Abigail Schreier, Jeff Garland, Ayan Hirsi Ali, Sam Harris, Heather Hying,
Jonah Goldberg,
Ben Shapiro, Glenn Greenwald, Sarah Shahi, Colin Quinn.
If there's a culture of victimhood, then let's tell stories of grit and survival.
Subscribe and listen now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's get back to the show. Did you see there was that tweet where like they charged $30,000 for some kind of Twitter campaign and got less impressions than you or I? Like I the thing I've always harped on with the LP or with the Green Party or any of these things, and I make this point myself, it's like, you're on social media. This is an even playing field for you people. This is a chance for you to attack the fucking Republicans and the Democrats. You're going to look. This is why my book was able to be so successful. If you go on Amazon, the listing for the Anarchist Handbook looks the same like a book like J.K. Rowling. It's in the same format. There's the book cover. Here's the blurb. It's not going to be indistinguishable. Whereas in a bookstore, you have to have the stamp of this is from Simon Schuster, McGraw-Hill, or whatever it is before it even gets foot in the store. Same thing with Twitter or Facebook, whatever you have. It's like, here's the Republican Party. Here's the Democratic Party. Here's us. We can be equal. and we could punch above our weight. And they are incapable of doing that. And if you have someone there who's incapable of exploiting social media, as Donald effing Trump did in order to become president, you need to find a new person, no matter what part your party is or stands for.
Yeah, it's all symptoms of the same problem, which is something that Rothbard was very critical of the Libertarian Party for back in the late 80s, which is that he goes, there are these people who, some of them are very good on theory and are smart people and have read a lot about libertarian theory, but like haven't read the newspaper in a decade. It seems like don't know like anything about what's going on around them and are completely tone deaf to the new landscape, the moment that they're in, what's happening, which is, by the way, one of the reasons why sometimes, I mean, there are some bad people in there, but for the most part, they're very blue-pilled people who are not necessarily bad people, but they'll tweet these things like, you know, whatever. They'll tweet, we condemn racism as irrational and repugnant. And they get ratioed with all these people like, fuck you, you cucks to the progressives, all of this. And they're like, whoa, these people all must be bigots. Because all we did was tweet out that we hate bigotry. And now they have a problem with that, which from the blue-pilled perspective, you could kind of see,
of course,
why they would feel that way. But it's like, it's just because they're so tone deaf to the moment. So yeah, look, none of us probably, right? Like me and you, Michael, in the 80s or the 90s, if someone was tweeting out like, oh, we're against racism, like, I don't even think that would have just been like, okay, yeah, we're all against racism. Yeah, we don't like racism. Sure. But the thing about right now is that there's kind of a mass hysteria going on around this term racism and bigotry and homophobia and transphobia, where every person who just disagrees with the progressive agenda is labeled all of these things. And in the middle of this mass hysteria, when you come out and say something like that, it's seen as at best pandering and at worst encouraging and validating the mass hysteria. So when you completely miss all of this tone of what's actually going around you know, and that's what happens when you come out and just go, yeah, we support Black Lives Matter, we think they're great, and you're like, you're aware cities are burning right now, right? Like, this is kind of a weird time to come out and say, there's just, so in the same sense of what you're saying, it's like,
no one's going to call themselves like, we're the looting club.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Like, no one, like when you say we support, yes, the concept of Black Lives Matter is 10,000% valid, but that term just, and read your Orwell, you know, the government has like Homeland Security is meant to keep you unsafe.
Yeah, right. It's like we could also theoretically support you could support a People's Republic, but if you go, we support the People's Republic of North Korea, that might have a little bit of like a different connotation. Or if you were just say make America great again, like, wait, hold on, that means something in the popular lexicon. Like that's not just saying the words out loud. And somebody is literally going on, like, you know, on Twitter, and they're watching, you know, like at some Black Lives Matter rally where they're throwing something through a window and smashing it, and then they're running up to a bunch of white people at a restaurant and surrounding them and going, say Black Lives Matter, say Black Lives Matter, and like flipping the table over, and they're like, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives. And then you see the Libertarian Party like, Black Lives Matter, and now it's like, oh, so this has a different context now to it. And that's what people are. So anyway, to your example, it's like, they go, look, this was when Biden declared the OSHA mandates about businesses with 100 people or more having to get tested or vaxxed. They go, listen, we want to put out a commercial that we oppose this. Or someone challenged them to do that. I think Jeremy Todd challenged them to do that. And they were like, okay, we'll do that. And so then they ended up raising all this money. The commercial comes out like weeks and weeks later. You know, it's like this highly produced kind of like campaign ad. Meanwhile, like just for one example, forget all the other stuff that we do. Some kid, I have no idea who it is, but I bet you it's a young person in the Mises Caucus, saw a clip of mine on Kennedy where I'm arguing with some lady about vaccine passports, cut it together, edited it up nice, put it on TikTok and Twitter and all this. It's got millions of views all over the place, like way more views than this one will ever have. I think it cracked 1 million just on TikTok. And then like on all these, I don't know who edited it. I don't know who put it up. All you needed was one kid who's savvy.
He's listening right now and is banging his head against the monitor because this is his moment and you couldn't be bothered to learn his name.
Well, this happens a lot with me and you, is that I'll say that and then someone will let me know afterward. And then on the next podcast, I'll give him get his props. So you'll get yours.
And I
Whoever
like
can
how
figure
you're
that out.
saying his, because it's got to be a dude.
Listen, if you saw this video, it was edited real good. No chick was doing this, Michael.
It's a video, not a cake. Yeah.
Jeez. But so all they needed was they just understood that it's like and the other thing is that they won't use their personalities, which is so stupid. So they edited this kind of like it seemed like something out of the 80s or 90s. It's kind of like a narrator being like, Joe Biden's vaccine mandates are unconstitutional, a violation of basic freedom. And it's like, look, you guys, there's all this video that is kind of public domain that you could use of people like you and me, Tom Woods, Ron Paul, Justin Amash, Spike Cohen, like down Eric July, like all of these different people who are known people in this liberty sphere that you could just use any one of, or cut up a montage of them and show, listen, all of these people who, okay, so now you already have a built-in base where the people who support them are going to be real excited to share this around. It's just, there's no like savvy or understanding of what today's moment is. It's like, no, this isn't the way. And you don't need $30,000. You could literally pay some kid $500 who's real good at this. He'd be thrilled to do it. By the way, you don't even have to pay him, because half of these people are such true believers that they'll do this. They'll do this shit and just be happy to help the cause. So it's just, that's all. That's a big part of what the Mises Caucus is too. Is that it's much younger. It's more people who are like aware and of the current atmosphere and are not tone deaf. And that's also why some of the older guard, not like the loser brigade types, but like some of the older guard think that there's like this bigotry problem in the Mises Caucus, is because typically our response to the woke insanity of calling everything you don't like racism and Nazism and transphobia and all this is to ruthlessly mock it. So they just see these young libertarians mocking the idea of something being racist or that. And they're like, well, look at this. This is like toxic. But it's like, no, there's a hysteria going on. And as we were saying before, with the way you deal with things on Twitter, this is not a dynamic that can be reasoned with. There's no reasoning with these wokesters. You just have to mock them.
And the other thing that the blue pill people often don't appreciate is that human beings respond to incentives, right? They don't think in those terms. And here's a big disconnect, which is this. Let's suppose you are interested in fighting racism, which I don't think is a bad goal whatsoever. If you are the Libertarian Party and fighting racism, what are you going to have? What consequences are you going to have? There's not going to be like, oh, I stopped this Klansman. There's going to be very little to show for it. Whereas the other approach, the Mises approach, if you make that video, right, and this elicits a response from Mitch McConnell's office, or it upsets Nancy Pelosi, or it kind of makes some reporter ask, Greg Abbott or Nikki Haley some really question they didn't want to ask because this video went viral, and reporters, sure, they're partisan Democrats, but they sure love messing with people. I mean, there's an article every day about what a horrible person Kamala Harris is. Bill Clinton was forced to ask about rape allegations in 2016, which he most certainly had not had to do in the past, and was kind of shocked about it. So that is a big difference, which is if you are going to use a Libertarian Party to fight racism, you're going to have very little to show for it. If you are going to use it to really upset some very nefarious people on a personal level, you very easily will have consequences to show for it. And that's a huge incentive for young people to get motivated. It's like, wait a minute, I made this happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And another point separate from yours, but it has to do with incentives as well. And the idea of mocking the people who call you a Nazi or whatever, is that, and I think Curtis Yarvin did a good job of explaining this, that one of the reasons why this kind of woke culture has been so intoxicating is that it gives so many mediocre people, unimpressive people, this kind of narrative. Yes, this standing of where they are in this world. And that's part of the reason why you can't argue it out of a lot of these like college freshmen. It's like, well, here's what wokeism gives them. They are a warrior in a fight against evil. You know what I mean? Like, what are you offering them? You're offering them you're nothing. You're some first year college kid who doesn't know shit. Go read a book on economics and get back to me. And they're like, well, that's really hard. And in the meantime, I have nothing to be proud of. So who's going to win there? So you almost can't just argue with them like, well, actually, you know, like racism compared to a lot of other countries isn't that big of a problem in America. Here are the policies that you need to understand to know what really hurts Black people. And it's like, that's not going to work. But when they come at you with this, like kind of, oh, you're a Nazi, just like the only way to win that is to go, whatever social currency you think you're getting for this, I promise you it's going to cost you more. So stay away from this. Like, this stove is hot. Don't touch it.
Yeah. Dave, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this interview?
No, my favorite part of this interview is that when I first came on the call before we started recording, you went, oh my God, your hair, it looks like, and then you went, no, we'll just save it for the show. And then for the 5 minutes setting up, I just had to sit here like a chump waiting to get blasted by Michael Malice. I'm like, oh man, what's he gonna say? This is
you are a disaster. Hey guys, this episode was sponsored by Crowd Health. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and enter promo code WELCOME to get your first 6 months for just $99 a month.